Okay, I have Nate Berry, and we're going to talk about wild health and precision performance and precision nutrition, medicine in a healthy, holistic way. And I talk about this all the time. Just love the Wild Health program and love looking at genetics and looking at performance and longevity. So I'm excited to dive into these topics today as they are true to my heart and just kind of where I am in my life as an ex-competitive Ironman athlete and marathoner. And I don't know if I'll ever be able to race again that distance, but I know I'm all about performance in my day-to-day life and longevity. So I thank you for coming on the show to talk to the low carb endurance athlete, or people are trying to burn fat, improve their performance in life and sports, but also hopefully everyone's working on how to optimize their health as their future self, what they want to look like and how to perform their best in life 20, 30, 40 years from now.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Debbie. Really excited to have this conversation today. And this is something I'm very passionate about in dealing with all realms of performance. And I'm sure we'll have a lot of fun topics that we'll dig into today, but excited to share with your audience what we do at Wild Health and this whole idea of genomics, precision medicine, and all that entails. But yeah, really looking forward to this conversation.
And I must add in, it's been on my list for the last few years to do the Wild Health not practitioner program or their internship for a year.
Yeah, the fellowship. Yeah.
Fellowship. Yeah. I always sign up like, oh, I got to figure out how to fit this in. So it's still on my wish list to do. But talk a little bit about what the program, what you guys do for athletes to help them be their best self and future self.
Yeah, absolutely. So it entails kind of the whole gamut. We try to be as holistic as possible, and we really use this idea of precision medicine, and we really use the genetics to give us those in-depth clues about your individual needs, what your blueprint, your genetic blueprint looks like, so we can really get a holistic idea of kind of your underpinnings, if you will. And then we want to get an understanding of your lifestyle, your goals. So if you are kind of a elite endurance athlete, or you're trying to compete in an endurance endeavor, we obviously want to understand what the training demands are and the rigors of the other stressors that you have in your life. Your diet, how are you operating with your current lifestyle? And then really diving into the biochemistry. So looking at all of the blood markers, really to kind of see, like, okay, where is your, genetic framework? What's your lifestyle? How are those interacting? And what's the downstream effect in your blood? And so we want to pick up all those clues. We want to dive deeper. So we're going to use further testing. Sometimes we'll do micronutrient testing. Sometimes we'll do microbiome testing. And the list is exhaustive of all the testing that we can do. But again, we're just trying to get all the little details we can to really prescribe the optimal lifestyle and all of the supporting cast environmental factors to really create the optimal environment to support your goals and really enhance and up-level your performance.
Yeah, I know that's kind of what I've been so fascinated about. I think it started years ago as just being a personal trainer and a coach for triathletes and runners and endurance sports, that I was always thinking there's more to it. So I created the holistic method, kind of 8 elements I coach on. But then that's why I became an FDN practitioner, to be able to do the functional lab testing. And before that became nutritional therapy, because there's so much food is medicine, but also genetically, the DNA Fit program I did years ago, and really putting that all together is so essential to really figure out how to personalize a program for an athlete. And how do you feel like to get athletes to realize it's so important to collect all this data and get a personalized program? Because so many people just, I always say, want to drop 10 grand on a bike, but they don't want to spend money on doing a genetic test and looking at their labs and really getting it into it. So what's your kind of sales pitch for why an athlete should invest in a program as this?
Yeah, you're so right. And I really think it comes down to the higher level you get, usually the ceiling for performance becomes a lot tighter, right? Those small percentages matter a lot more. And usually, it really comes down to an injury or a longevity in the sport. Like it's going to come to its ugly head at some point. It's hopefully getting them to realize and buy into it a lot earlier than, obviously, and preventing something catastrophic or a decrease in performance down the road. And so that's different for everybody, kind of what their motivations are, and kind of pushing the right buttons, and kind of making it sexy, if you will. But the results that we've had for our athletes that have really bought into the program, and the information is great. But if there is a large gap between what you know and what you do, then that's a large issue for an athlete. And that tells me a lot about their psychological framework, that we probably should address the psychological side, kind of the mental, the mindset, right? And so that's a big area. That's a big performance retractor. And so if we can really identify what those performance anchors are, and get them to understand their strengths and their weaknesses, and say, if we can make your limitations at least good enough so your strengths can really shine, not only is your performance going to increase now, but your longevity in that sport is going to be a lot better, and you're going to be a lot healthier, and just the quality of life within that sport is going to be at a much higher level.
So I writing down notes if people are watching the video. It's just like, it's just such up my area that I thrive in, because I got adrenal exhaustion, as I said, back in 2013. I haven't been able to get my body back to race an Ironman. Now I don't have the interest anymore to put myself through that, because doing even a marathon, the what we give give out training for an Ironman. I mean, I was swimming, biking, and running, doing strength training. I was doing Pilates, core work, yoga, and working full time plus, and people that are married and have family, kids. It's so hard to put it all in. And I was competing high level, trying to win my age group type of level. And it's just to get that back to doing that on a weekend. You'd swim in the morning, and then you go for a long bike ride, and you run. Then Sunday we would always do a long run. It's like, oh my gosh, that's all for so many years. You're just like, that's what I do. And I still work out, swim, bike, run, and do that. But the amount of dedication it takes to do an Ironman, because you've got 3 sports, it's a little bit, I think, mentally easier to fit in doing a trail race or cycling, or one sport event as a running. But how does it impact, how do genetics impact that performance, and for an athlete that's doing all that? Because why did I get adrenal fatigue, air quotes, because it's not what it is, but why did I get metabolic chaos, and other people can train and run a business and have the financial stress and this stress that I did, that caused me health conditions that went on forever, and then others can just push through it and just keep racing. And I have friends that still race high level in Ironman and do Ironman Hawaii every year and all that. So what's the difference when you have issues
Yeah,
that others don't?
it's so interesting, because we all have, different blueprints, right? Just like we all look different on the outside, we all look different on the inside. We have different needs. We train to different stimuluses differently. We are predisposed to being deficient in certain micronutrients. We have different injury risks. Like the gamut, obviously the list is long, just in terms of everything we look at within that genetic framework. But the success we've had with our athletes is really, once you start kind of living a life that meets your genetic needs, then you can kind of get this genetic potential really turned on. And it's pretty fun to see when that happens. But there's nothing healthy about elite sports, like the amount of stress that you're putting yourself under. But you have to keep this level of health to be able to support that, and that looks different really for everybody. So we really wanted to get at the underlying issues that are creating the problem, and then make sure that we're getting the right fixes, getting what you need. And that's an ongoing process. The genetics get us to a certain point, and then it's kind of really fine tuning and tweaking and making sure that we're using the objective feedback mechanisms to really give us the data that we need back to really kind of, again, fine tune and really tweak as we go along. But it is so interesting, because there are some people that just handle stress better. And so the way you have to be diligent about the very particular application of volumes and intensities and densities, like that has to be, prescribed very, very intelligently, especially when you have other stressors going on, like the way you pulse in certain nutrients and recovery modalities at the right place at the right time. There are some athletes like Kobe Bryant who can just be very, very efficient and a high performer with a very small amount of sleep. And that's not everybody. And I think we always, we measure ourselves to these very high performers. And again, that is not everybody. And so you really have to understand what makes you tick, and then really apply the best strategy for you as an individual to get the most out of your potential.
Well, that's why I'm such a big believer in just kind of what I'm focused on doing for my own coaching program is to personalize it. That I'm trying to help people avoid going through what I went through, and that I can't, my body won't go that long anymore
Sure.
without stressing it. And I just don't want to go back to where I was 5 years ago and all the work I've done for myself, that it can be prevented. So if you're looking at genetics to start, what are some main genetic markers we look at, or some ones that impact our ability to, perform our best and recover? Because it's the stress, oxidative stress we put on our body, as well as the life stress, and we overfill that beaker of stress. So what are some main genetic markers you look at for performance and longevity?
Yeah. So, again, it really kind of depends what's the most important thing for that individual, based off of, again, what are they feeling? Where are their performance weaknesses? And so it differs, and it obviously depends for each individual, or where we're going to spend most of our time within our genetic report, because we look at 800,000 different genetic SNPs. And SNPs is a single nucleotide polymorphism, which is just a genetic variant, if you will, for the listeners. But sometimes it's okay. We really need to hone in on nutrition, so we're going to look at our nutrition genetics, and the way we break that down is really kind of looking at fuel sources. So that's saturated fat, that's carbohydrate, and that's mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids. Protein is going to be dependent on, obviously, your physical demands, that you're putting the stress on your body under that amount of stress. But we really want to find, like, what is the optimal fuel source. And there's so much variety within that, just because there's life stressors, there's times of year, there's different training stimuluses. So there's going to be some adjustments that we make within that genetic framework to obviously match their demands as well. But that gives us a really good idea of, like, okay, what is the ideal diet for this individual and a fuel source for their performance. I think just as an example, one of the big ones we look at is caffeine. I think caffeine is such a major performance supplement that a lot of people use, but we have athletes that they have genetic predispositions that actually that caffeine increases anxiety, and it's actually not a performance enhancer for their genetics. So we use nootropics, we use nitric oxide boosters to support their pre-workout supplement regimen. And we really hone them off of caffeine, because it can negatively affect their psychological outputs. And it can also affect their sleep. So that's just an example of, like, different micronutrients that we look at. But they all are important, and it's also important to look at all of the genetics in combination, and not just kind of focus down one rabbit hole, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know it's always like we're putting the missing pieces of puzzle together to really personalize a program for a unique person.
Yeah.
But it is, looking at different ones that maybe stand out more than others and help really look at their symptoms. Probably you see kind of if they have current complaints or concerns that they're just not performing well. So, and a big one is people having more prone to type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance. And I know I tested different genetic tests out years ago, and I kind of put it all into one spreadsheet to see if I saw correlations and similar recommendations, but I'm more carb intolerant. So do you look at those because I think the big question is people want to burn fat and lose weight and to improve performance that way by the whole weight loss, fat loss. I rather say fat loss, because we won't just lose weight, we want to lose fat. So what information can you help people figure out with what to eat and the macronutrient ratio, and what information do you put together to figure out what you're talking about nutrition?
Yeah, exactly. So like your genetics predispose you to being a negative response to carbohydrates. So that's definitely something that we look at. So that's kind of goes within our fuel source, and that will kind of dictate what's the ideal macro structure for you as an individual. And it's the same thing. We have some people that are, if they go too high of fat, they can actually get an insulin response as well for type 2 diabetes. So it's kind of all over the spectrum on the nutrition side. But then we also look at like methylation is a big process that we look at. So you may have heard of like MTHFR. We look at kind of choline as well. So if you're familiar with methylation, it's kind of it's how we turn genes on and turn genes off. And if you are not methylating properly, then you're going to back up and get a high level of homocysteine, which is a very inflammatory molecule in the body, and it reduces our anabolic load in the body. And so two big pathways for that are choline and folate. And MTHFR is kind of the big one that most people have heard of. But that really kind of drives like, okay, if they're not methylating properly for an athlete, it's a very important biological process for athletic performance. Let's make sure that we're attacking that if they are folate and B12 deficient, then we should probably supplement with that. And same thing for all the other micronutrients too. We also look at there's different ones like for athletes specifically like Col5A1, which increases your risk of tendon and ligament injury. And so with those athletes, we probably need a little bit more collagen or glycine, kind of those precursors to collagen, zinc being another one, and vitamin C. So again, we just pick up those clues to really decide, okay, are they more prone to risk of injury? Where are their intolerances? Where are their predispositions? So those are kind of some of the specifics, if that makes sense.
How do you do your genetic test? Do you have people upload their raw data from like 23andMe, or do you have your own test?
Yeah, so we use LabCorp. So that gives us the chip that we use for saliva testing. That gives us a lot more SNPs that we look at, and so that gives us the 800,000 that we look at in total. 23andMe, I think, is actually at like 60 right now. It might be a little bit higher. And we actually had to develop an algorithm that really sorts through all that data. 3 years ago, before we had this database, it would take probably a day for our health coaches and doctors to prepare for one patient, just to sort through all that information and really kind of come up with a game plan. And with the algorithms and the tech that we have now, we're really able to pull in the biomarkers, pull in all the genetic data, and it kind of spits out a report. And that really gets us 60 to 75% of the way. And it's really kind of the health coach having the meetings with the patient, really understanding their personality, understanding their preferences, and then having the doctor kind of come in and also take a look from a medical standpoint and perspective, and then kind of working with that individual to come up with a game plan. Because if we give them a strategy saying, hey, you're probably insulin's a little bit high right now, and we recommend a strategy, and they just are resistant to that, or if it just doesn't fit their lifestyle, then we're creating a fracture point where we're not going to get any fall through. So it's so important to give the strategies to meet their needs and where they're at, and that we truly are meeting them where they're at currently.
I always love saying that. Meet the client where they're at, and then finding their areas of opportunity that they need to work on.
Yeah.
So it reminded me of something I was looking into, is that if people have higher A1C, so their average glucose level for 90 days, and no one seems to want to test. Doctors don't ever test insulin. You have to really, I've been trying to work it from this new doctor is saying like, I'm prone to diabetes. Don't you want to test me now? Then I do have diabetes. It's so ridiculous. It's not preventative. It's just find out when you already have it. Yep. But if you have like a testing, if people's glucose is running higher different times of the day, if you're doing a CGM or ketone test, what have you found, like a breath test too with the ketone meters have been testing out, but correlating the data from people's blood chemistry to a GI map, like if it's higher because they have a parasite activity that's causing more stress. And it's so fascinating to me to go, okay, blood chemistry, glucose, ketone levels, insulin maybe higher. So putting that all together, I think is always so fun and fascinating to me to investigate and take all this.
Yep.
And it just shows importance that you can't just do only genetics. You can't just do one thing. You have to kind of collect all this information and really personalize a program.
Yeah. Yeah, you're so right too. And it's so interesting because I think a lot of functional medicine doctors right now, specifically dealing with the high performer athlete, is they chase a lot of numbers and they don't really know what the cost of high intensity exercise is on the biochemistry. And so they chase a number, and a lot of times they're chasing the wrong number for the wrong reasons. And that's a lot of time and energy to take away, from someone's training if they're going down the wrong rabbit hole. So I think it's really important to understand, how the biochemistry plays out with high intensity exercise. In some of our elite athletes, we see hemoglobin A1C a little bit elevated compared to norms or what's optimal. But sometimes it's not the best measurement of blood sugars. It can be, obviously hemoglobin. If they're exercising all the time, their blood sugars are going to be high compared to the average person. But we also look at other markers in combination to get the whole perspective and picture of their metabolic health. I think a continuous glucose monitor is a phenomenal tool for every athlete, especially when you're kind of fine tuning and you're dialing in their macronutrients for performance, right? Their fuel, like what is the optimal macro breakdown. Using a CGM is phenomenal feedback. So again, I think just like you said, and it's microbiome makeup. It's also, how you cook the foods that can actually change the glycemic index. So there's so many factors, like you said, it's so fun to really kind of put it all together and really make sure that you're looking at every perspective and every lens to make sure you're not going down the wrong rabbit hole, or you're taking a left turn when, you should have taken a right turn.
Yeah, so much on that area because I've been really talking this I don't know 6 months, this whole year on the show, matching your nutrition with your exercise and
Yep.
how to do carb timing. And not all carbs are bad, but what type of carbohydrate. So
Yep.
anything on figuring out their macronutrient ratio. If they're an endurance athlete, I think it's going to be different than a HIIT training. But again,
Yep.
if they're more carb intolerant, it just figuring that out for a person based on their type of workout they are doing
Yep.
overall, but also each day is going to be different. And then I've been really going down a rabbit hole of a female athlete that has hormone cycle
Yep.
and trying to chart that all out. So if I have female athlete training for something, I have it all different for that 30-day cycle.
Yep.
So what have you found to figure out macros and how to carb time, and where does protein fit in? Because that's a big thing, talking Dr. Gabrielle Leon, the, ideal body weight, that's how much you want per day. So
Yep.
anything you could throw in on nutrition, what you look at for an endurance or high and charging athlete?
Yeah. So obviously the big one is looking at their metabolic health first and foremost, with their genetic preference for what fuel source, and that will kind of give us our starting point. And then obviously for an endurance athlete, we want to flip between both fuels. We want to use fat and carbohydrate for fuel. So we want to be very metabolically efficient. I think bringing in ketones as well, adding that kind of fourth fuel, if you will, is another game changer for the endurance athlete. We can talk about that more in just supplemental form. Oh, there you go. You got your shots ready to go. Yeah, so that's kind of our starting point. But then going from there, diving deeper, like you said, for the females, like I think tracking your cycle is an absolute must for the female, and really kind of parsing out between follicular and luteal and ovular, just making sure that you're changing slightly your nutrition strategies within that phase of the cycle is so important. And so time of year too, I think summer versus winter also plays a role into that. And again, just looking at a continuous glucose monitor, making sure, the other big one that we really pay attention to is carbohydrate sources, just making sure that they don't cause any gut fermentation. And then also like a well cooked, like slow cooked carbohydrate is a lot easier to digest than something raw too. So looking at the cooking process that we go through to really fine tune, like, okay, what is the ideal carbohydrate and the amount of carbohydrate at the right time.
So that was on my list. I was writing questions. Is I was talking about what to eat, when, why, and how.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
I think the what to eat is so confusing because if we listen to the keto world and the carnivore world, we're not
yeah,
supposed to eat any carbs. You listen to Paul Saladino, all we're supposed to eat is nose to tail and some berries. Everything else is SHIT. So you can't do anything. But it's just like, okay, there are some, I was working on my clients doing Ironman next week. We're working on what type of carbohydrates are good to add in. So if we're doing low carb athlete, fueling in a little bit more carbs the last 3 days, but good quality carbs that are easy to digest. It won't spike your glucose level up, and that will give you an extra, fill up your muscle glycogen storage before race day, even though we're
yeah,
burning mostly fat. And then some carbs, people are racing, they're going to burn more carbs. So
yeah,
when we're doing the train low, race high, we're adding in those carbs strategically. But go back to what you're saying, because I think people are confused of what carbs are left to eat if
yeah.
you are metabolically efficient and you're metabolically flexible. You have fat burning as your main engine, carbs are your backup engine, but we still need to use them. But what do we eat?
Yeah, yeah, and it's going to be a little bit different for each person, and it's such a hard blanket strategy
I
to
know.
really go into, and there's so much nuance there.
But like the fermented, I was just looking up the resisted starches, the
Yep,
slow release energy from
yep,
those and what those are. And then, it doesn't, the safe starches, I guess is the other word for it, and what are good quality that aren't going to be anti-nutrients. All the
yep,
vegetables seem to be bad, any nuts and legumes and stuff that's not properly prepared. And so it's just like, what can you eat that's easy to digest? Because I'm not going to eat a steak and go
yep.
race the next day, but I have to have, figure out timing and macronutrient ratio.
Yeah,
Is always,
yeah. I think when we exercise, we want to have high cortisol, right? And if our insulin spikes too high, then that's going to drop our cortisol. So you're really playing the balance act. And so making sure that it's a fiber rich complex carbohydrate is a super important strategy. The big one, if I could just point to one, like I really love the canned pumpkin. I don't know if you've seen that. It's like an organic canned pumpkin. It's already like pureed, and it's just a super easy, digestible, very tolerable carbohydrate that I love to prescribe to athletes. Is kind of pulsing in the right carbohydrate, easy to travel with as well. So if you're traveling for races, it's super easy to have when you're on the road. And that's a one I really like. And they have these supplements now, like you can. There's one that we really like called isomaltulose, which is a beetroot carbohydrate. So it's a very resistant carbohydrate that I don't think has as much effect on the microbiome than you can, that most people have heard about in the endurance space, just because it's a genetically modified cornstarch. So we usually trend our athletes more to the isomaltulose, and we've had a lot of success with that as kind of a closer to race carbohydrate.
what brand, have you found a different brand that you like that has that in it? I haven't heard it up.
I forget the one that we've been using recently.
I know UCAN is great. It worked for me, but other people it caused huge GI issues, gas,
Yeah.
because I think that corn, a lot of people can't do the cornstarch.
Yep. Yep.
Or S
Yeah.
fuels is something we just did a podcast with, but S fuels is another good fueling strategy for low carb athletes as well when they want to
Yep.
add in some carbs.
Yep.
I'll have to look at the beet. So those are good foods, but doing the sweet potatoes or potatoes, rice, but cooking it, cooling it, and that makes it more the resistant starch. If you're making like your pre-dinner the night or 2 nights before, you might add that in with your chicken or turkey or whatever
Yeah.
fish.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point that you just brought up, Debbie, is because I think a lot of people are so focused on the meal right before the race or before training, but it really starts 24 to 48 hours before the race, right? Or before training, especially to get glucose and get all of the other positive nutrients inside the cell. Like creatine, for instance, it does take a lot more time than just the 3 hours leading up to the race. So really kind of focusing on the 3 days, like you said, leading up to the race is so important, and a lot of times goes unnoticed.
Well, I know Dr. Dan Plews says in their Endure IQ program that I've talked about on the show is that like leading up to an endurance event, they do, and this is Dan Plews, it works for him to like 130 grams of carbs total per day. And then 3 days before a race, you do 50 grams more, say the race is Saturday, and then you get up to 200 grams on Thursday and then on Friday for a race that you're racing like higher into heart rate. And then there's Ben Greenfield that talks all the time. His philosophy and what works for him and our athletes is, doing more low carb throughout the day, being more nutritional ketosis, and then put in those good nature's carbs at your dinner. That will help fuel you for the next morning if you're doing a workout fasted, or if you have a little something in your coffee. But having a morning workout, you'll have those muscle glycogen stores topped off. So, because a lot of people, that goes in the next topic, being fasted exercise and how to have enough fuel in the tank and when to have strategic carbohydrates if you are doing all these fasted workouts, but your energy is crappy and your performance is decreasing. So I think fine tuning. So what do you find for carb timing and for fasted exercise for endurance and higher intensity exercise?
Yeah, so I think there's a really good point to doing evening carbohydrates. We have some athletes that don't do well with their sleep and doing carbohydrates at night, even if it's like higher fiber complex carbohydrates in the evening. It still affects their sleep a little bit, and that's a small percentage. But with them, we'll kind of flip that around a little bit, and we'll do more of their carbohydrate timing around exercise, and then pull back to a little bit more protein, fat heavy in the evening, just for those people, just because sleep is so important, as and we don't want to disrupt sleep at all. And then we'll try to get a little bit more carbohydrates before workout in the morning. But we do like to use fasted training in endurance athletes and kind of our high intensity athletes, more of our strength and power athletes. I think it's a great strategy to be metabolically flexible. I think it's a great strategy to be able to do high intensity and low intensity exercise fasted. I think one big thing is making sure that it's not prolonged for a long period of time. I do believe that it will start to affect the hormones negatively. And sometimes we'll pulse in some essential amino acids before, especially high intensity exercise, to try to keep those hormones intact during high intensity training if we are fasting. But I do like this strategy. Again, it just has to be applied in the right time and the right dose. So I think it's a great strategy. Just has to be used correctly, if that makes sense.
Well, the answer, I think, is always, it depends.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, you hear me say that too often, I guess.
No, I mean, we say that all the time on the show because everyone wants, just tell me what to do. Like, that's why, you have to hire a coach that's going to personalize it, because all this information that you hear everywhere is just, here's a template, and then you need to adjust and experiment. And I keep saying, if you're not getting faster, you're not losing weight, if you're not recovering well, why are you doing what you're doing? You got to change it. So the definition of insanity, you have to pay attention. All right, I'm actually slower, but I can not eat for 10 hours all day and I feel fine, but my workout sucks. So it's like, what's your goal? What's your focus area? And what do you want to get?
Right. And
absolutely. It blows me away.
I think when performance is decreasing, or we're not matching up to the level of performance that we expect, or we're failing to meet our expectations, we blame ourselves first and foremost. And we're so hard on ourselves as athletes. But to me, it's always like, okay, how can I improve my strategy? It's all a learning process, right? It's like, okay, that didn't work well. What can I reverse engineer to improve my strategy for the next race, or for the next training session, whatever it may be? And it's a constant experiment. It's a constant process of dialing in. And just like you failed and you learn through your experience, and you're obviously taking that into what you're doing now, and really helping the people that you coach now, but it's all a process of learning and how we can truly improve our strategy to get better, because the mental side can only take you so far, right? We have, especially endurance athletes, have this phenomenal psychological capacity to with endure pain and handle that amount of stress. But when they fail, it's a hit to their identity versus just truly looking at the strategy and how can I improve and make myself better for next time.
I'm laughing because I think it is such mindset, because we're usually type A, AAA personality. Anyone that does this kind of triathlons or racing, anything, hardcore sports, that I think when you get into keto and people that get into carnivore, they just feel like they're cheating if they eat some berries, or if they have a sweet potato, or have something that's not on the list, and they don't realize that sometimes that can help their performance. And like I said, you feel like I used to do not eat all day and do OMAD, but I was training. It's that energy flux. I like that new word, and I want to do a whole show on that. Just energy flex, your energy in, energy out. If you're like way off balance, I just think that's the issue for most of us athletes. We just are stubborn, driven, ambitious, and we don't always know, oh, red flag. Because I said, when I got adrenal exhaustion in March 2013, it didn't happen that day.
Right.
I mean, I didn't gain 30 pounds. I did nothing different and gained 30 pounds of fat weight. And I wasn't sitting on the sofa watching movies all day and eating chocolate and bags of chips. So it's just so funny to me that we don't listen to our body and make those adjustments and course correct when we aren't getting the results we want.
Yeah, we're so I think as a society, we're really taught to turn off that almost intuitive nature when things are going wrong, and just kind of keep pushing forward and keep driving. And especially that type A personality, to be able to shut off that stress and keep going, to be able to shut off that pain and keep going. But there's so much information out there, right, Debbie? I mean, it's, there's this camp that says eat this way, and there's this camp that says eats this way, and it's so hard to parse through all of that information. And that's where I really think, having a coach and to teach that intuitive feedback, and to give you some objective measurements. I think the subjective side is so important, because the subjective side, to me, if an athlete is super in tune, always shows up before any other objective feedback measurement that we can take. And so having that relationship and communicating with that athlete, to me, is always the most important sense of feedback that I can get. And once they kind of know the whys and know what they should be feeling, and once they kind of have that intuition, that's when we really can pick up those clues that come a lot quicker before the biochemistry or before the biofeedback device that tells you your HRV the next day. So that's so important to me. And then also, just again, adding all the objective measurements, so we're getting the right feedback, so we can kind of apply the precision strategies to make the athlete better and give them what they need to really help them sort through all the information and misinformation out there. There's so much misinformation, it's hard to know what to believe.
Yeah. So going back to testing, lab testing, what have you found with hormones? Because that's a big area. I keep finding them coming across with men, not just women, but thyroid, getting a full thyroid panel, another hard one to get from a doctor, to get reverse T3. They just look at TSH, thinking that's it. But what have you found with hormones for men and women that are athletes too, that are struggling with fatigue, weight gain?
And that's a hard one too. And even with our athletes, like male athletes, I mean, females obviously are a much more complex physiology than males, but even with our male athletes, is testosterone's obviously a big one, right? We measure testosterone in the blood, so we measure total and free, but we don't measure their receptor density. And so even through the blood, we're not giving the whole picture. And that's, if they have a higher, receptor density, they don't need as much total and free. And if we tell them that, oh, they have low testosterone, what do you think the psychological effect is going to be, that even though that their motivation is high, and they're, gaining muscle mass. Obviously they're very anabolic because they're performing at a very high level and they're holding on to their muscle mass. But again, we're chasing a number, and I don't think we have the whole picture. And then obviously with the females, just making sure we know exactly, what phase of their cycle that blood draw was taken. But we definitely is a big sign of reds or overtraining when we see a hormonal imbalance. And so we really want to apply the autonomic intelligence of learning how to be present and all in when they're training, but also to turn off and disassociate from that stress when they're not training. And so applying that vagal brake, making sure that they're getting into parasympathetic mode is so important. Making sure that they're getting all the micronutrient needs, make sure that they're getting all of the supporting cast of sleep and enough macronutrients and enough anabolic load to obviously support that amount of stress is a huge one for hormones. So it's definitely a big clue for us for overtraining and reds for females. But again, like I said, just making sure that you have a complete picture and just not chasing a number just to chase a number, I think is super important when you're dealing with blood work.
Yes, for sure. Do you do Dutch tests for hormones or just do the blood? Do
Yeah, we do. Yeah, we do the Dutch test quite a bit. And usually with our females, we sometimes do with the males, but usually most of our female athletes are using the Dutch test at some point if there is a hormone irregularity that we're seeing or imbalance, and we just need further information. So that Dutch is a really nice panel to say, okay, there is some issues within the blood work. Let's take a deeper dive, and then we'll use the Dutch.
Is there, I wish there's a way to see kisspeptin because that keeps coming up of women and men,
Yep.
that more of the women are showing more sensitivity, that
Yep.
hormone that just would be good to have a marker of kisspeptin.
Oh, for sure. And also I think too, like even looking at like a true micronutrient panel of looking at blood, saliva, urine, and even hair to get a complete picture, just make sure they have all of the precursors that they need to build those hormones. I mean, I think, when we see these strategies of different diets, sometimes if they're going more vegetarian route for a long distance athlete, endurance athlete, they might be missing essential amino acids. They might be missing retinol, vitamin A, which is a big one. They might be missing copper. So there's a lot of like micronutrient precursors just to make sure that they have, if they are following a certain diet, if that's maybe a little bit on one side of the spectrum or other, if that makes sense.
So do you choose nutritional therapy, like whole food sources first over supplements, and combine supplements with lifestyle habits, of course, because we can't out supplement poor
Yeah.
lifestyle habits. As I say, we can't out exercise or nutrition habits.
Yeah. Yeah. You're 100% right. We always try to go diet first and foremost. If they're super low in any certain nutrient, we'll probably use a supplement just to get them to baseline and saying, hey, we probably need a therapeutic dose just to get you to baseline in a hurry. But it's always food first. But with a lot of our elite athletes, I think especially when they're in a heavy, high intense training phase, it's so important to have the appropriate supplementation. We've gotten a lot better results once they have like the basics mastered, right? Sleep, nutrition, stress management, a spiritual side to them, like all the psychological factors, the right mindset. Once they have those kind of in place, then the supplementation is just kind of the cherry on top, if you will, to really kind of support them. And sometimes we get a little bit nuanced with that if they're ready for it and can handle it. Otherwise, it's very basic.
And then another question, of course running out of time as I always do, but to improve metabolic flexibility, to be fat adapted, and then still have ability to switch to carb metabolism, because that's a huge topic. People are all or none,
Yep.
they go switch to keto, but they get so fixated that that's all I can do forever. And they lose, I think, the ability of carb metabolism. we did a podcast with Jay Feldman on the energy metabolism, how it's just not like why carbs are bad for you. It's just like, well, what you're eating and your microbiome, but how is your metabolism, why you can't metabolize it. So what is your way to become fat adapted and to improve metabolic flexibility? Do you have kind of a system to get people there?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that's where we really bring in the fasted training quite a bit as well. That's a big strategy for that. We'll pulse in actually a full keto diet at certain times of year, kind of in the early training stages, um, for a multiple of reasons. Metabolic flexibility, it's also very healthy for the brain. And so obviously they're going to get a lot of benefit from the ketones as well for the brain. It's very neuroprotective, reduces neural inflammation. So there's a lot of positive effects, especially with kind of our contact athletes that deal with that brain trauma consistently. So even with our heavy, 315-pound offensive linemen, we'll do a keto diet with them for a certain amount of period. Now it's probably going to be a little bit less because we have to maintain a certain body composition. But for our endurance athletes, it's probably going to be a little bit longer. But I think definitely kind of fluctuating between the two, pulsing in carbohydrates at the right time, taking off carbohydrates at the right time, doing some fasted training is all of our part of our process in terms of getting them metabolically flexible.
Yeah, I think those are important notes, and timing that when to do what, the fat adapted phase to do off
Yep.
season,
Yep.
as we talk about the Dan Plu's program in Endure IQ, is do your cold keto. Women only should do it certain times of their female cycle, and men can do it whenever, but off season.
Yeah.
And really take that workout schedule down to the
Yeah.
short
Yeah.
amount
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
just add little hit training. But it's more like pair that with your off season when you're just doing recovery, mobility and movement, but not excessive training. I think it's essential because then you're just stressing more stress on your body. People don't realize all the stress that we put on from eating too little and eating too much throughout the day, but it's also what we're eating with
Yep.
exercise. Okay, so last question. I kind of goes back to what we were talking earlier on the microbiome and testing, like with GI map or Genova diagnostics. Do you
Yeah.
find any correlation with testing the microbiome and insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, metabolic dysfunction?
Yeah, the microbiome is so complex, and I think even from a literature standpoint, we've like barely scratched the surface. But I do believe that I think the big thing we see with like the microbiome inefficiency, if I for a lack of a better term, we see like inflammatory markers go up. I think there is a little bit of insulin resistance. Usually it's kind of combination, kind of inflammation and insulin resistance kind of go hand in hand. But that's probably what we see more often is inflammation with a disrupted gut microbiome. But I definitely think it definitely affects the way we metabolize carbohydrates and food altogether. And there's also like looking at like leaky gut and looking at SIBO. There's a lot more than just the microbiome and the function of the gut. So we really like Genova quite a bit for our testing. We've used that pretty extensively with our athletes. But I think when stress is high, it really shuts off the gut, and we see that a lot more in females than we do in males. Right, the vagus nerve and the effects of the brain. But obviously, when the central nervous system is taxed, usually the gut gets burdened as well.
So that goes back to what we're talking about, like me as an example, that
Yeah.
I got my metabolic chaos, gut issues and parasites,
Yep.
dysbiosis, leaky gut, everything. But I was doing low carb, healthy,
Yep.
fasted workouts, metabolic efficient, super fit, best shape of my life. And then
Yep.
it happened. So
Yeah.
it just how I always say chronic stress impacts everything you do, even if you're trying to do all the right things. If you don't manage external stressors and those internal stressors, you're still going to have these crazy microbiome, example of all the disruption you're going to get in your immune
Yeah. And
system.
the especially when you see candida and yeast overgrowth,
Yeah.
that response to carbohydrates is usually going to be probably one of the most areas that's affected, especially geared towards carbohydrates. They'll be a little bit more sensitive. But you're 100% right. I couldn't agree more. And that's one area we've actually, from a supplement side, is when stress is high, we try to use some transdermal products to really get nutrients, transdermally, because obviously if you're in the middle of a season, like there's not a ton of stress you can get back. Like the goal is really to manage them the best you can, but there's not really a time where we're going to be able to completely restore the central nervous system. So what can we kind of bypass the gut? I mean, obviously trying to do all the things to maintain a healthy gut while stress is high, and also the stress management techniques. But what can we get from a nutrient standpoint transdermally that can bypass the gut is kind of been an interesting area we've kind of trended.
Can you give any examples of what you use?
One that we've had a lot of success with is glutathione transdermally.
Yeah.
Another one is magnesium. And then we use a lactic acid bufferer, L-carnosine, that we've had a lot of success with for buffering lactic acid.
As just put it on your
It's
skin.
just a
Skin
yeah,
is
it's a
mouth.
yep, it's right, 100% right. It's just it's a gel, and we've actually found that more prevalent than like beta alanine, or even sodium bicarb. But yeah, had a lot of success with that.
Yeah, because I always have, that question is, we give all these supplements and it's just, one podcast I listened to is more Ayurvedic medicine, but you're like the powders and dryness that we can
Hmm.
only absorb like 20% of what we take in, and
Yep.
that not to just take so much. So that's why it's better to eat like organ meats. I'm
Yep.
not an organ meat eater. I'll take it in a capsule still, but it's just how nutritional therapy is so important. But I'm so into any more liquids, or transdermal would be so amazing if we get more of those on the market, because
Yep.
I'm always thinking, okay, I'm taking all these, but are they doing anything? Are they
Right.
breaking down in my body, and how do they,
Yep.
going where they're supposed to go?
Yeah, and that's where I think the making sure that you're doing some sort of micronutrient testing just to really get a sense of what are the levels in the body, and what's improving, what's not, and looking at like, okay, what is the means of supplementation? Is liposomal going to be a little bit more bioavailable than pill form? From what we've seen, yes. But making sure that you're getting the right application with your supplements, and actually testing is a important thing to think about.
So out of time, but where can people learn more, and tell us how to send any links and whatnot to them, where to follow Wild Health?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a full kind of athletic optimization division. It's called our genetic optimization athletic team. So that would be working with me as our director of athletic optimization, and then our lead athletic optimization doctor. His name is Dr. Tom McCoy. And within this division too, it's a little bit higher of a price point, but it's like kind of a full concierge service. So if you're traveling on the road and you need a supplement sent, that you have access to an executive assistant that will send you a supplement wherever you're at or at home. Or if you're on the road and you need some body work and need to find a massage therapist or acupuncturist, we'll do the research for you, just to basically take away all of the energy and time, to make your time so much more efficient towards training. And you can reach us at that what we call GOAT division is www.wildhealth.com/athletics. Or if you're just interested on the genetic side, looking at your full genome as well as your blood work, we have a clinical side, and that's just wildhealth.com.
And when did that start? I remember Ben Greenfield did a really long podcast with them when they first started that. Like
Yeah,
3 years
so
or
yeah, it's been about 3 years now. And then the genetic optimization athletic team, we started about 6 months ago.
okay, fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, love that stuff. And it's obviously I'm passionate about that area, because there's so much you can do if you're gonna wear yourself out training for races and racing. but also if you want to improve, as I said before, your future self, if how I want to be living when I'm 70, 80, 90
Yep.
years old. And I think it's taking ownership of your health now. And as I said with the doctor, not testing my insulin when I'm already diabetic, let's prevent it. And
Yep.
knowing those clues that we can collect, but investigating our genetic health and our what's actually going on now in our bodies, so essential to really wanting to have peak performance in life and sports. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your time, and really appreciate you having this podcast and getting this information out to the masses, because it's so important to have people like you that are doing the research and doing the coaching and are really seeking this new level of performance. We need more people out there doing the work. So appreciate you, and thanks for having us.
Yeah, I think it's something I try to just redid the cover of the podcast. If anyone noticed it, I put fit and healthy athlete. I wish I can add the word happy underneath that because there's too many words, but fit, healthy, and happy athlete was what we should work on.
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.